Jimi Hendrix, considered by many to be the greatest guitar player in music history, is found dead at the age of 27. With no will to be found, the rights to his music and image are up for grabs.
It's the single most expensive estate battle in the history of rock and roll other than the Beatles.
A battle erupts that spans over 4 decades and leaves a family divided.
He starts yelling at her, calling her names, and I says, Leon, you gotta stop this stuff.
But when the stakes are worth an estimated $80 million, emotions can run high.
It was like a slap in the face. I wasn't angry, but I almost wanted some revenge.
Guitar legend Jimi Hendrix is found dead in a London hotel room.
Jimi dies in 1970 from mixing alcohol and sleeping pills. He had shacked up with a woman, a groupie-type woman that he had just met, and she had sleeping pills that were in German, and they were much more powerful than American sleeping pills. Jimi, in all likelihood, thought the otherwise, thought they were weaker, and took a handful of them, took what would have been about 30 times the recommended dose, and happened to drink that down with a significant portion of red wine.
Emergency service workers find the superstar alone in his room. Jimi's management team calls his father Al in Seattle, Washington, to break the news. Jimmy Williams was Jimi Hendrix's best friend growing up in Seattle.
I got a phone call from my sister, and she's turned on the radio, you know, Jimi Hendrix just died in London or something, and I said, oh no, you know, that's not true. And so I turned on the radio, and they were doing the announcement, and I says, I gotta go over and see Al. So she said, I'll go with you. So I went over there, and Al was he was just broken.
Jimmy's younger brother Leon has been behind bars at the Monroe Reformatory for just over 6 months. On the morning of September 18th, he's awoken with the bad news.
Everybody's got a radio. And it said Jimi Hendrix dies of drug overdose. And then everybody said, turn that radio off. That's his brother upstairs. You know, so everybody turned their radios off. And then the chaplain came over the loudspeaker and said, Leon Hendrix, 415-617, report to the chaplain. And then that's when I knew that it was true.
There's a phone call for Leon.
My dad was on the phone. He said Jimmy died, and you know, and we were both crying. But then the whole prison seemed to have this respect for some reason. When I came back, the whole prison was silent.
Leon is devastated.
They put me in solitary confinement because they thought that I might want to commit suicide.
For Leon, Jimi Hendrix was more than just an older brother.
Jimmy was in charge of me. Anything that happened to him, I had to go. When he went to play, you know, band practice, he dragged me along.
Their relationship, it was special because it wasn't just a brother to Leon, he was like a father. And they kind of lived in an impoverished life, so it was kind of Leon and Jimmy against the world.
I didn't know we were poor. You know what I'm talking about? There was no reason for me to ever think that, because I always had a sandwich or, you know, something, you know. And Jimmy used to provide it for that.
Jimmy and Leon's upbringing has been rife with struggle. Their parents, Al and Lucille, divorced in 1951.
My mom was, we didn't get to see her much because after my dad and her split up, he took custody of me and Jimmy.
There was a lot of troubling things between Lucille and Al that I think Jimmy, you know, hid, you know, from his friends and stuff.
An alcoholic with a gambling addiction, Al has difficulty paying the bills.
My father did the best he could with what he had. We would wake up early in the morning in summertime, and he'd drag us out, and we'd go recycle cans and bottles and glass and copper wiring. Every now and then, he'd send us down with my little wagon, my little, you know, red flyer. wagon with a big 5-gallon diesel can from the Army, and we go get diesel. We bring it back to the house, and that was our heat for like 3 days.
Often, Al is forced to work nights, though there are other times when he just doesn't come home.
Well, Al was definitely a heavy drinker during Jimmy's childhood. There were stories that neighbors told me of Al literally knocking, or not even knocking on the door, just walking in to a house, laying down and falling asleep on the sofa. Al thought that was his house when his house was a block away.
He went to work at 3 o'clock when me and Jimmy got out of school. And he didn't come home until 12 or 1 o'clock at night. You know, so it was hard for him, but he did it. You know, I love that old guy. He's cool.
Social services receive tips from neighbors saying the boys are being left home alone.
The welfare people were trying to take me and Jimmy from my father. Every day, they'd park outside and wait for us to come out and try to capture us. You know, and my dad said, "Don't answer the door," you know.
While they manage to avoid the social service agents for a while, Leon is eventually taken into foster care. Fortunately, he is not too far away.
Leon tells stories of often leaving the foster home he was at and going to find Jimmy. There was definitely a very strong bond between these two boys.
But it's not the first time Al Hendrix's family is broken up. Back in 1948, Lucille and Al have a third child, Joe, who was born with health issues that include a club foot, a cleft palate, and one leg shorter than the other.
He was born with a number of birth defects, and they raised him, they loved him, and they seemed to be doing relatively well with his upbringing. He would go a couple times a week to this place called Children's Hospital in Seattle for therapy.
After Joe, a daughter, Kathy, is born blind, while another daughter, Pamela, and a son, Albert, have minor health issues. They all become wards of the state and are put into foster care. For 3 years, Lucille and Al try to keep Joe, but the financial strain is too great.
That's the part that's heartbreaking, is that Joe had been around for a while. Joe is old enough to have had memories of it.
Some say that for Al and Lucille's relationship, it's the straw that broke the camel's back.
There got to be a point, though, where Al Hendrix thought it was too much. It was one of the biggest points between Al and Lucille. Lucille wanted Joe to stay with them. Al wanted Joe to be given away to the state for foster care. And eventually Al won that argument. They dropped Joe off at the hospital.
Though divorced, Al and Lucille maintain an on-again, off-again relationship. When she dies in 1958, it hits the family hard.
You know, one of the most heartbreaking story of Jimmy's childhood is that his mother dies when Jimmy's just a young teenager, when he's 15 years old. And she died of cirrhosis of the liver in all likelihood. Her spleen ruptured.
My dad said that Mom had passed and we're gonna go to the funeral, but then he had got so drunk that he missed the funeral by like 8 hours. You know, we went to the funeral home and they said, oh, that was at 2 o'clock. And we went there at 8, you know, at night. And so Jimmy was pretty upset about that.
Jimmy becomes introspective and turns to music. He idolizes Elvis Presley, Elmore James, and Little Richard, and practices playing guitar, first on a broom, then on other stand-ins.
First guitar was actually a ukulele. And he was, you know, he played Peter Gunn on it. Dun, 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 dun. And then he would tune it up to get to the next key, and he played over and over again. Dun, 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 and then he tuned it up. Dun, 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 dun. You know, that's how he started playing guitar.
Soon after, Jimmy finds a used guitar he likes for $5, but initially his father refuses to buy it for him.
He said, no, I'm not giving you $5 for a guitar. Are you crazy? You need to work with your hands. Jimmy, actually, we were having dinner at our auntie's house, and Jimmy said, Aunt Ernestine, there's a guitar for $5, but my dad won't buy it. And my aunt went crazy over my dad, slapped him. He said, if you don't buy that guitar, I buy it.
When you see the skill that he showed when the world discovered Jimmy at 21, it appears that Jimmy at that point had been playing for decades, and the truth was he'd only been playing for a few years on very, very crude instruments.
The guitar is an obsession for Jimi.
Some point, Jimmy was showing up with his guitar strapped to his back, neck, downward, and didn't have an amplifier, but he went around and played, for anybody who would ask him to play. And that guitar went every place with him. I mean, he played it constantly.
Seattle, Washington, 1967. Leon is working in his father's landscaping business. For 5 years, Jimi has been chasing his dream of becoming a professional musician. Preoccupied with life on the road, Jimi hasn't communicated much with his father and brother. One day, during a lunch break, Al and Leon hear loud music coming from a neighbor's apartment.
These people downstairs are playing this loud rock and roll music all the time. And for some reason, my dad said, that sounds like Jimi.
Leon discovers they are listening to a record by the Jimi Hendrix Experience. It's the first time Leon's seen the album, and he takes the record over to show his father. They're floored.
It's like, wow.
Just a year earlier, Jimi was playing $6 gigs at small clubs in Greenwich Village.
It was very different for an African American to suddenly be in white people's land, in folk music land. But Jimi began playing some of the exact same songs he'd played in Harlem, but they played very differently in the village. They were exotic. Jimi combined that with playing the guitar with his teeth, playing behind his head, playing with one hand. Those things to a white audience in the village seemed extraordinary.
He is soon discovered by Animal's bassist turned music producer Chaz Chandler.
One day at a club in the village called the Cafe Wah, Chaz Chandler, who had been the bass player in the band The Animals, and saw Jimi doing that. Chaz infamously spilled a milkshake on himself. He was so impressed by what Jimi was doing.
Chaz becomes Jimi's manager and takes him to England.
Jimi packed up one suitcase, that was all he owned, got on a plane and flew to London in 1966. Within 10 days of arriving in London, he was a star. It truly is one of the most extraordinary rise to fame in music history ever.
He forms a band, the Jimi Hendrix Experience.
His career took off like a snowball at that point. It went just out of control.
Hendrix went to London to launch his career. He kind of did this reverse British invasion thing where he went overseas to get things started and then came back to America as a rock and roll hero. This is a guy who defined the psychedelic era and did a tremendous amount of groundbreaking work in a very, very short amount of time.
In less than 2 years, the Jimi Hendrix Experience is looking for their big break in North America. After landing gigs at Monterey International Pop Festival and Woodstock, and with 2 more albums under their belt, the band's popularity explodes. But during the hippie movement of love, psychedelic music went almost hand in hand with a psychedelic lifestyle.
Drugs really only came into his life once fame happened and once money happened.
This lifestyle, along with an almost obsessive work ethic and non-stop touring schedule, eventually catches up with Jimi.
As he got more famous, he became more unhappy because the demands were different than going to the Cafe Wah on Friday night. That began this downward spiral thing. They booked Jimi like 2 gigs a day in Europe. So it was like killing him by attrition, by wearing him out.
He clearly did eventually develop a bit of a problem with drugs towards the last year of his life. And in some ways that did lead to the lifestyle choices that eventually led to his death in 1970.
Many believe when he took the handful of sleeping pills the night he died, he was just trying to get a good night's sleep.
The alcohol that he drank and the alcohol already in his body eventually led to his death. He did not overdose intentionally. It was not an overdose from, let me take a bunch of stuff and feel really great. It was, I'm exhausted, I need to sleep, I'm taking a ton of these sleeping pills, and I'm gonna drink it down with red wine, and he died.
Jimi doesn't leave a will. Jimi's father Al is considered his next of kin and is in line to inherit the rights to his son's musical legacy, until a paternity suit threatens to take everything away.
If you look at a photograph of this child and you look at a photograph of Jimi Hendrix, even though his mother was a blonde Nordic woman, you go, this is clearly Jimi Hendrix's child.
Guitar superstar Jimi Hendrix dies without a will suddenly at the age of 27. Everyone assumes his father, Al, will inherit his son's estate, but his claim is about to be challenged.
Jimi had at least 2 children that we know of. One of them was a woman with a woman named Diana Carpenter, who he had met in New York. She had been a prostitute during that era, and Jimi hooked up with her.
Harlem, New York, 1966. Jimi and Diana Carpenter are living together when Diana discovers she is pregnant. At Jimi's insistence, she stops working the streets for a while, but it's not long before she starts up again. She soon gets arrested, and the two part ways. Diana's daughter Tamika is born in February 1967. Nearly 4 decades later, Jimi's childhood friend Jimmy Williams runs into Diana in Seattle in 2004.
I just happened to meet a woman by the name of Diane Carpenter, and she said that she was Jimmy's ex-girlfriend. She had a daughter by Jimi. And I said, oh, wow.
Her lawyers launch a paternity suit in 1970, before Jimi's death. They send letters instructing him to do a blood test, but it never happens. A year before he dies, Diana tracks Jimi down after one of his concerts.
She clearly approached Jimi at one point in San Francisco and Berkeley and told him, "I've had a kid by you." And Jimi hung out with her, at least in the airport.
It will be their last encounter. Jimi never officially recognizes Tamika as his, though he does carry a photo of her, and in the unreleased song Red Velvet Room, he sings a line, "How's Tammy?" After Jimi's death, Diana challenges Al's claim to Jimi's estate.
She says, well, I'm here with my daughter to put a claim in for some of the estate.
Whenever there is no will present, estates go to the next of kin. But her case isn't convincing enough, and in 1972, the courts rule against Diana's claim, saying that because no blood test was taken while Jimi was alive, paternity cannot be established.
That child's DNA has never been tested against Jimi, and so we're only taking Diana Carpenter's word for that.
If Jimi is her dad, it's got to be the worst feeling in the world that you can't get your family to acknowledge that you're, his kid.
This leaves Al with the rights to the entirety of his son's estate. Not knowing much about the music biz, though, he hires attorney Leo Branton and producer Alan Douglas to manage his son's legacy.
Shortly after Jimi died, and this is as I understand from the court records, I wasn't an attorney on it, Leo Branton basically sent something to Al that said, sign here and I'll take care of everything.
My relationship with Al Hendrix was a very warm relationship. He trusted me completely. He was very responsive to whatever advice I would give him. He always indicated that he appreciated what I was doing for him.
Leo soon discovers that Jimi was in debt.
I found out that he had about $20,000, and he had loads of debt. He owed his manager over $300,000. He owed money to Warner Brothers that they gave him as a loan to build a studio.
He would finish a concert and go out to a club and jam all hours of the night, but all the business dealings he didn't care about, and he frankly was very bad at. He was a very popular performer. He made more money at Woodstock than anyone else, and yet a week later he played for free on a Harlem street, and that cost him money. He made decisions that were primarily based on his desire to play music, not on what was smart business sense.
In short, Jimi doesn't leave much, but he does leave an extensive song catalog and hundreds of hours of unreleased recordings.
Alan and I went all over the world trying to find pieces that Jimi had done and had never been made into a record and had never been produced or distributed. And from this, we made 6 post-death albums. It generated millions of dollars for him.
Leo Branton then went on to manage the estate, while paying some royalties to Al Hendrix.
Along with occasional lump sums, Al receives around $75,000 a year in royalties, and to him it's more money than he's ever seen in his lifetime.
He was giving half of that to me, and I didn't know. I thought he was making way more money than that, but he'd never told me that.
Al is just happy to be able to provide for his family for the first time. Seattle, 1966. 8 years after the death of his first wife, Al Hendrix meets Ayako June Jinka, a mother of 5, including a daughter named Janie. They marry soon after. Jimmy never lives with them and only meets his stepfamily a couple of times.
That woman had a couple of children of her own, including one young girl who lived with her at that point, who would have been about 7 at that time in 1967, and that was Janie Hendrix. Al eventually marries the mother and adopts Janie Hendrix. So Janie Hendrix is not related to Jimi Hendrix by blood. She is his adopted stepsister.
Leon is living off and on with his father still, and he sometimes looks after his new sister.
My relationship with Janie was a big brother to little sister relationship. I took her to the bus stop to go to school. I picked her up. You know, I babysitted her, read her the Bible, did all the things that big brothers should do for a little kid.
Content with his family and his royalties, Al thinks all the dust has settled. But in the early 70s, another woman comes forward claiming to have Jimmy's love child.
Jimmy had many, many girlfriends, was very free with sexuality. He was not worried about birth control in that era, and may have several other children that we don't know that have never come forward.
When Jimmy plays concerts in Stockholm, Sweden, he has flings with Eva Sundquist between the years of 1967 and 1969. She claims that she became pregnant with their son, James Daniel Sundquist, in 1969. A few years later, Eva launches a paternity case in Swedish court. Leo Branton, Al's lawyer, tells the Swedish courts that the claim is baseless.
I researched the law and found out that in the United States, one could not bring a paternity cause of action after the death of the alleged father. It must be brought during his lifetime. And the reason for this is there is no way for the alleged father to contest the claim because he's no longer around.
Nevertheless, in 1975, the Swedish courts side with Sundquist and declare her son to be Jimmy's rightful heir.
So I rejected the claim because I knew that there was no way she could ever collect on this in the United States.
Childhood friend Jimmy Williams is surprised to hear about the case.
I picked up a paper one day and I saw this picture of this kid in LA that was suing the Jimi Hendrix estate because he was Jimmy's son. The attorney for the kid, he was just looking for any way to try to get somebody to recognize this claim.
If you look at a photograph of this child and you look at a photograph of Jimi Hendrix, even though his mother was a blonde Nordic woman, you go, this is clearly Jimi Hendrix's child.
Jimmy Williams, who's become good friends with Jimmy's dad, Al, is upset that he has denounced James' claim. He confronts Al.
Went in and I says, Al, is this your grandson? Probably. And I said, well, what percentage do you think that that's your grandson? And he said, oh, probably 150%. So he just trapped himself with me right there. And I said, so you are denying this kid, you know, and you got all of these other people part of the estate and you're denying him? And I said, you know, I've been your friend since I was 8 years old. But this friendship's gonna be ended if you don't do something for that kid. And I walked out.
In 1978, Al appears to settle things with Sundquist.
He showed up at one of our favorite drinking halls and he beckoned me over to the table and I said, yeah, what's up? And he said, Jimmy, I want to let you know I gave the kid $1 million. And I said, that's the old Al that I know, you know.
If these children really are the children of Jimi Hendrix, it seems like they should publicly be acknowledged as that. And as far as I know, neither Tamika nor James Sundquist has ever gotten that kind of public acknowledgement from Jimi's estate or heirs.
By 1997, with both paternity suits finally handled, things once again appear to have settled down when a letter arrives, offering Jimi's siblings Leon and Jimi Hendrix $1 million each, and changes everything.
You find a lot of people influencing Leon and explaining things in ways to him that he might not be able to understand. He's being scammed, essentially.
Certain people claimed that I was robbing the estate, which was a lie.
After inheriting his rock star son Jimi Hendrix's estate, Al Hendrix hands off the management reins to his lawyer Leo Branton. Leo has licensed out the rights to Jimi's music, entitling Al to royalties, but the contract is about to expire. In 1991, Leo and Janie, Jimi's younger siblings, receive a letter from Leo Branton that will change both of their lives.
The reason for the offer from Leo Branton was because the copyrights were coming up, and the law was that the next of kin would have to sign off on it in order for him to renew the copyrights for himself.
There is a quirk in the law concerning musical compositions that when Mr. Hendrix, who got all of the income from these things, when he died, the income would go to his children. And Al wanted to be able to control those things, and so I conceived of the idea of his buying out the children's rights.
The letter offers Leo and Janie $1 million each to sign away their rights as inheritors to Jimi's works.
And I told them that before I have them sign off on this $1 million sum, they had the opportunity of going and consulting with their own lawyer and to see whether or not it was a deal that they should take.
While he is now in his early 40s, Leon doesn't have a steady job and his income is unstable. Lured by the instant riches, as well as wanting to set up trust funds for his own children, Leon blindly signs on the dotted line.
I said, I need 10% of it now, and they gave me $100,000.
You find a lot of people influencing Leon and explaining things in ways to him that would, at Leon's age, that he might not be able to understand. He's being scammed, essentially.
Janie, however, does hire a lawyer. Her lawyer claims that Branton is giving the Hendrixes a raw deal by feeding them misinformation on how much Jimi's music is actually worth.
Certain people claimed that I was robbing the estate, which was a lie. They claimed that Al was getting nothing but $75,000 a year. It's true that he was only getting $75,000 a year, but that's because of the fact that Al said that's all he wanted to live off of, and the rest of it would be generated and saved in his trust.
He said, I trust Leo Branton, and I said, but Dad, every day in the news I see Jimi sold like $10 million worth of records this year. And he said, well, I don't know about all those kind of details. I just know that, I trust Leo Branton and think he's doing a good job.
I made him a multimillionaire. If I hadn't come into the picture, we don't know whether he would ever earned the kind of money that I was able to generate for him. I'm not sure that other lawyers would have been able to get rid of all of the debts like I did.
Janie relays this information to her father Al and convinces him that they should go after Leo and Alan to win back the rights to Jimi's music. It's the beginning of a partnership that will later shut Leon out.
They lived together. She lived in his house, and I lived way across town.
With Janie's help, Al severs ties with Leo and hires a new lawyer in 1993. He files a lawsuit against Leo Branton, producer Alan Douglas, and 2 distribution companies.
The next thing I know, I am served with a complaint charging me with fraud, theft, unfair dealing, and along with a letter that this lawyer now represented Al Hendrix, and under no circumstances was I to communicate with Al Hendrix in any way.
Al and the family decided in the 90s that They'd kind of had enough, felt Jimmy's legacy wasn't being well dealt with, he wasn't being preserved. It just wasn't a fair deal in the first place, and definitely wasn't being managed as a fair deal.
They go back and forth with lawyers until 1995, but the case doesn't go to trial.
My father won all the music rights to the Jimi Hendrix estate back to him by claiming incompetence. He didn't know what he was signing. There's no reason for him to give away, $25 million a year for his little $75,000 a year salary.
Al's team eventually settles with the two distribution companies, giving him back control over the rights to license Jimmy's music. With this new power, Janie and Al create a new company whose sole purpose will be to manage Jimmy's legacy.
And they formed Experience Hendrix, Authentic Hendrix, and that's when Janie Hendrix came to come start working on the estate.
They make a deal to authorize Jimmy's music to MCA for $40 million. Despite being able to live even more comfortably, Al continues working for his landscaping business and appoints Janie, whom he now trusts deeply, as Experience Hendrix president. Leon is given a chance to step in, but he's not interested.
My dad said I didn't have to work there because I was doing my own thing. I was doing my art, had my own nice little job place, and stuff like that.
Al Hendrix tells Leon that he has established a trust for him, entitling him to 25% of the estate. By this time, Leon has divorced his first wife and is the father of 6 kids. He is grateful.
My dad always told me, he said, don't worry about anything, Leon. I take care of your whole thing, your whole family and everything. You got trust fund and everything's fine. So I said, okay, cool.
Around this time, Al starts having some problems with congestive heart failure. Janie is awarded power of attorney, and Al gets moved back and forth between his home and an assisted living facility. Leon isn't happy about it.
I had to go take him out of the hospital, put him in a private facility, and he came back to life. And when I come and visit, he goes, turn that channel, rub my feet, scratch my back, He was back to life.
But a few years later, on April 17, 2002, Al dies in his sleep at his home in Seattle. At the time, Leon is in LA and he flies home for the funeral, but tensions are growing between him and his stepsister.
For one thing, all the seats were taken up by her family, and so I was upset with that, so I said, hey, you guys got move back, come on. We're here for the funeral. And then when the military came up and gave her the flag, that should have went to me as a son, and I'm also a military man, and that kind of hurt me.
Leon got emotional when, they read the sermon at the site, and Janie wasn't too far away, and he starts yelling at her, calling her names, and I says, Leon, you gotta stop this stuff, and so I grabbed him and pushed him, and everybody was saying, Leon, don't do this, you're disrespecting your dad's funeral.
Things become even more heated when Al's will is read the next morning and Leon isn't even invited. He doesn't know that he's about to be completely disinherited.
I just got a letter to my attorney from their attorney saying, here's your inheritance. And that was it. 1 gold record. It was like a slap in the face.
Al Hendrix, father of guitar legend Jimi Hendrix and heir to his estate, dies in 2002. His younger son Leon is immediately suspicious after he isn't invited to the reading of his father's will. Leon's lawyer gains access to the will after a few days and tells him to come over to collect his inheritance, a single gold record of Jimmy's. As shocking as it seems, tension has been building between his stepsister Janie and Leon for some time. 1996, Seattle, Washington. Leon is living a hustler's life, one he's led since he was a teenager.
Leon, it's probably safe to say, was somewhat the black sheep of the Hendrix family.
I was like a street kid, and the only relief I ever got from that is when Jimmy came home and took me on tour with him. Otherwise, I was back on the streets, doing my hustle, doing the thing. Selling weed and, messing around, getting in trouble.
He also has a debilitating crack habit and smokes it every day. Al attempts to step in to make his son go get treatment, but Leon is unable to control his addictions.
I had some problems with addiction, alcoholism, cocaine addiction, and I had a problem with that. I didn't think I had a problem, but evidently my kids did because they intervened and got me sent to a treatment center run by musicians.
He eventually completes a 2-month stint in rehab at the Impact Drug and Alcohol Treatment Center in the late 1990s. After his release, he's close to once again falling off the wagon until he meets Jasmine Rogue.
She actually is a drug counselor. So putting him with her in a good element actually keeps him on a day-to-day basis, sober.
We're still together, so I appreciate her. It's all because of her that I'm successful today.
Despite getting his life back on track, Leon was still left out of the last will Al signed in 1998. Janie's legal team maintains that Al cut Leon out of the will because of his lifestyle.
I just got a letter to my attorney from their attorney saying, here's your inheritance. And that was it. One gold record. And it wasn't even an original one. It was just a copy that she took off her wall to give to me. So it was like a slap in the face. I wasn't angry, but I almost wanted some revenge.
Leon had a bad record. Leon had a record of drugs. He surrounded himself with irresponsible people, and Janie's defense team argued that he would go for the fast buck and get rid of the estate rather than let it grow.
His lawyer explains that Leon appeared in all his dad's wills except for the last one, which Al revised in 1998.
My dad wrote several wills, and every one of them I was named as the only beneficiary.
Al's will gives the bulk of the estate, estimated to be worth $80 million, to someone else who's been waiting in the wings.
When Al Hendrix died in 2002, he left the bulk of his estate to Janie Hendrix, the daughter that he had adopted from his second marriage, who was not related to Jimi Hendrix by blood.
After he died, I was cut out of the will. And the whole Hendrix family, in fact.
Leon doesn't have enough funds to sue for his right to inheritance alone, but real estate developer and friend Craig Diefenbach offers to help.
When I was left out of the will, I was really upset at first. But then I had some crazy people that decided to spend millions of dollars on suing my sister.
In August 2002, they file a lawsuit contesting the validity of Al's will.
What Leon was trying to show was an undue influence and why there was a codicil signed in Al's will, basically cutting him out of his inheritance. And his position was that it was Janie and that Janie didn't want him to have anything.
There's no way in the world my father would have cut his whole grandkids out of the Jimi Hendrix estate.
Leon had a great case going in. Al made a lot of efforts to take care of Leon all through his life. So it becomes questionable to me why he would at the end.
At the same time, Leon launches a second lawsuit joined by other family members, claiming that Janie and Vice President Bobby Hendrix have grossly mishandled Experience Hendrix's finances. They want Janie removed as trustee. The case goes to trial in June of 2004. Leon's defense team alleged that Janie has spent $1.7 million on her corporate credit card, taking out no-interest loans from the trust fund to buy herself cars, $3 million to produce 3 of her husband's gospel albums, and has failed to distribute any funds to other listed beneficiaries.
With respect to the money she gets as a beneficiary, she can do absolutely anything that she wants with it. She can do my gospel album, your gospel album. She's entitled to do it. It's her money.
Janie's legal team fights back, saying that the past lawsuit against Leo Branton and the current case against Leon have drained the trusts of their funds. They also argue that Al's will is valid and that they have proof.
There was a videotape in this case, and the videotape shows the signing of the will. And there's a dialogue going on between Al and other people on the videotape. And what the videotape shows is that he understood what he was doing.
I specifically asked her, why don't you just simply settle with Leon? Why don't you, find some way? Wouldn't that be much more inexpensive and an easier way out of this. And she claimed that what she was doing was following Al's wishes, and she had a duty to do that. Al clearly thought Janie had the best head for business and had a very close relationship with her, and he wanted to reward her, presumably, for the work that she had done to help him get the estate back.
There's a very high failure rate in this business. She's in a place where very, very sophisticated businessmen in the music world have gone under. I think she's done a good job. Al lived with Janie, Al lived with Leon, he had lived with Jimi Hendrix. He knew the situation, he made a decision. It's a decision that seems absolutely correct.
In an even bigger twist, during the 7-week trial, the issue gets raised whether Leon is actually Al's biological son. In court, Janie's legal team state that in Al's 1999 autobiography, he wrote that Jimmy was his only son.
I was quite shocked when I heard later that Al had, in his will, left nothing to Leon and claimed that Leon was not his son.
He also writes that Lucille had a history of sleeping around.
His mom was very young. She was someone who liked to go out.
In 1942, Lucille is barely 17 years old when she marries Al and is pregnant with Jimmy. Al gets drafted into the Army less than a week into the marriage, and instead of playing the good wife at home, she passes Jimmy off to other friends and family. When Al returns home from the war in 1945, he has to travel to California to claim his son.
Jimmy was born Johnny Allen Hendrix on the birth certificate. And when my dad came home from the war 5 years later, he goes and gets him from California and brings him to Seattle, and he says, "I'm changing your name." And he goes, "Why? I'm little Johnny. Everybody's calling me Johnny for 5 years." You know, he said, "Well, that's the name of your mother's boyfriend."
He and Lucille reunite soon after, though Lucille is still unable to settle down. In 1947, she becomes pregnant again, this time with Leon.
In many ways, she was very ill-prepared to be a mom.
I remember, like on my 5th birthday party, you know, she threw a big party for me. And all the neighbor kids came and stuff like that. And she brought her boyfriend that upset my dad.
Despite being uncertain if he's the father, when Leon is born, Al is thrilled.
Leon and his dad over the years had a good relationship. It was a dysfunctional relationship, but nonetheless, they were very loving and cared about each other a lot.
But during the 2004 trial, just 5 years later, Leon is ordered to undergo a DNA test.
Janie had me DNA tested to prove that Al Hendrix was not my father.
Meanwhile, Janie's legal team is ready to present the findings from Leon's DNA test. It doesn't match.
It didn't surprise me when it came back that he wasn't my father, but he was my father. Me and my dad knew this all our lives. You know, I said, "Dad, how come I got straight hair?" He goes, "Well, you got your mama's hair. I don't want to hear nothing." I go, "Well, Dad." He said, "Listen, I'm your dad, you know, and I'm the only dad you know. Forget about it. I don't want to hear no more about it." So I never brought it up again because he was my dad. I love him, you know. He loved me. He was my father, you know.
The court threw that out because Al accepted Leon as his son, so it didn't matter what the DNA said.
But there's another bomb about to drop. Someone else comes forward to claim his rightful spot in the Jimi Hendrix legacy.
I remember walking in the courtroom and I saw this kid that I said, "God, that's a clone of Al's."
Leon Hendrix and his adopted sister Janie are fighting over their brother's guitar legend Jimi Hendrix's estate. In the midst of all this legal drama, a new heir suddenly comes forward saying that he too should have a piece of what is rightfully his. Joe Hendrix, whose custody was taken over by the state in 1952, enters the courtroom, asking to be included in his father's estate.
He came out of nowhere to make himself part of the legacy.
Most of the Hendrix family has not seen Joe for decades, after Al and Lucille gave him up when they could no longer afford to pay for his health care.
I remember walking in a courtroom and I saw this kid that I said, God, that's a clone of Al's. And they said, that's Joe Hendrix, that's Al's son. I said, how's that possible? I never knew this kid. They said, well, he adopted him out.
Like Leon, the court orders Joe to take a DNA test. Many are shocked by the result.
She did a DNA test on Joe, and it came back that he was not Al's son.
Whatever manifestation of the DNA that came up when Joe Hendrix was born, he is clearly Al Hendrix's child, in my opinion. But that's just with my eyes.
The judge dismisses Joe's claim. On September 24, 2004, the judge delivers the verdict on the Hendrix estate.
In the end, it was ruled that Al's will was, the final will that he signed, was a legal document, and Al was given essentially the right to give the estate to whoever he wanted, and Leon was disinherited from the Jimi Hendrix estate.
The judge also rules to have Janie removed as trustee for some of the trusts, instructing that an independent party is to be appointed.
She lost a few titles she had, which are insignificant, and checks had to be written to cover the places where it was charged off to the wrong place. But there's no pattern here of any conscious pattern of reckless or wrongdoing or any kind of criminality. And there has been no criminal proceedings, of course.
At least $20 to $30 million has been spent on legal bills battling over who owns Jimi Hendrix. It's the single most expensive estate battle in the history of rock and roll other than the Beatles. It seemed to me that they could have settled this out of court for not much money, so it was really a battle of spite to some degree. Some fans wish that the maternal side of Jimi's family, or Leon Hendrix or some of his other relatives, profited. That when you buy a Jimi Hendrix CD at Target now, that money doesn't go to anyone on his maternal side. It doesn't go to Leon Hendrix. It doesn't go to his children. It goes primarily to this family thing controlled by Jimi Hendrix.
Some argue that without Janie at the helm of Jimi's legacy, his music would have been lost.
They brought in Eddie Kramer, who was one of the original engineers and producers of Jimi, and the sound of those re-recordings are fantastic. Some of the previous estates before Jimi Hendrix took over had done some just musical bastardization, where they brought in other musicians to play on some of those albums. And some of the first albums that came out after Jimi's death were just simply horrible and were awful. Most of that has been corrected now, and better versions of those releases have come out. So there have been some great musical things that they've done.
I know Al would have been appalled because he died just before this battle really took place. And my thinking is that Jimi would have wanted all of his family taken care of the best that he could.
My children are angry because they got really cut out. They feel as though they were entitled and they got ripped off, and they're still, angry about it. I let it go.
Even worse for Leon are the rumors that Jimi Hendrix did draw up a will, and that if it had been found, the outcome would have been very different.
There were a number of people who were Jimi's friends, including one of his girlfriends that he was with for a long time, who said that he had a will, but it was never found, never filed.
Leon does win a legal battle in 2011, granting him and his company Rockin' Artwork the right to use Jimi's image and name publicly.
Every time you see his face on something, you know that's Jimi Hendrix, right? So we won that right. That's the only thing we won in court.
The most important thing we won is we gave Leon a stake in Jimi's legacy again. Really is the patriarch of the Hendrix family, as his blood brother, as the only guy left running around that knew what it was like to be in a house with Jimi. Now when people are buying, Jimi stuff, wanting to look at Jimi and think about Jimi, they're getting the input and views from Leon on that.
She got the money, it's fine. I got the legacy and the heritage in my heart and in my soul and in my brain, and that's all I need.
Leon also carries on his brother's legacy in a way that Jimi would relate to through music.
He's a very talented individual because he didn't start playing guitar till later in his life. So for someone at his age to learn the guitar, and he would tell me sometimes when he's on stage, he'll be playing and he'll feel like he's about to mess up, and he closes his eyes and he says, "Oh, Jimi, please help me, please help me." And he feels him.
Despite all the legal drama, Jimi Hendrix will still be remembered most for his music.
When we're talking about the greatest guitarist of all time, Jimi Hendrix has to be in that conversation.
His music is both timeless, influential, and if you can really try to pull yourself back as someone that works with music and everything and think about nobody was doing what Jimi did before Jimi did it.
He's still looking out for me because I got a job now. I'm playing music. I travel around the world. I'm not done. I'm getting offers every day to go back, go here, go there. So I'm very blessed. Thank you, Jimi.